Okay, water teachings, taking the path of least resistance, methodological reflections on the Two-Spirit Dry Lab, on capacity bridging. This is important, because within research, everyone wants to talk about capacity building. Like the community doesn't have anything. We are going to roll in there and we're going to build capacity. Now, with Indigenous communities, there's lots of capacity. Like, we're not supposed to be here. Had the colonial project been realized, one, we wouldn't be here. And two, if we were here, I wouldn't be singing this song because I wouldn't know who I am. Lots of capacity within community. Within communities across Turtle Island. Recap, what it includes: Two-Spirit, the Two-Spirit Dry Lab. Ooh. Let me unpack our logo. Our logo was designed by Margaret August, who is a Coast Salish designer. It is split, looking at the balance of both masculinity and femininity. You can choose whatever side you want. The salmons in the forehead is a nod to most of our members, but not all members, and the lab is housed on Coast Salish territory. And it's also the moon, and a moon teaching, and it talks about the many phases of research and how it's always changing day by day. And then, because we're sex positive, some of us say that this is an homage to a glory hole. Okay? We rarely say that publicly, but I think I'm in friendly territory. Again, here is the lab. There are we had 3 new members join. So I'm going to say around 55% of the labs are Indigenous, either Métis or First Nations. Métis is a mixture of French and Cree. And settlers. We also have 2 elders, Elder Roberta Price, Elder Glyda Morgan. We have members, Saskatchewan, Haida Gwaii, Central Florida, Victoria, Northern California, Vancouver, Ontario, BC, Alberta, BC, Bath, England, BC. Jeffrey is from Providence, Rhode Island. So we're from, Chase is a Chickasaw grad student. That's his supervisor from Brown University. Northern BC, Ontario, BC, Manitoba, Ontario, BC, Victoria, Manitoba. What's that M province? That's just north of Saskatchewan.
Manitoba.
What is it?
Manitoba?
Not Manitoba, the Montana.
Oh,
Montana.
On this side.
Yeah. So we are literally representative, and we have like roots all across Turtle Island. This is at our last year's retreat, and these are the members that couldn't make it. So what's incredibly important about the Two-Spirit Dry Lab is often labs, when they come together, they want to talk about the what. What do we want to do, and how do we want it? And a part of that what is how are we going to do that, right? But for us, is the how we do the work is the most important thing, even more important than the work. So part of the how is a centering of Indigenous ways of knowing and being, doing, and seeing. We are a trans or multidisciplinary collaboration of Indigenous and non-Indigenous epidemiologists, knowledge translation folks, sociologists, researchers, community members, artists, elders, you name it. We have a really, really arduous membership process. Membership is like, if you want to join us, join us. And then my job as the co-PI is to watch, witness, to see what the gifts or medicines are. So like Ryan Stillwagon is a sociology PhD student. I had no idea that we needed a sociological analysis, but that's his jam. We have filmmakers, so we create spaces for the documentary because that's their jam. And so whatever their jam is, we try to find and we bring them in so that their fullness is seen and honored. We are also looking at Indigenous methodologies and approaches like the Two-Eyed Seeing approach, which was offered by Mi'kmaq elder Marshall. And Two-Eyed Seeing is is where from one eye, we take a Western view. There are like some good things about West, like I'm sitting here in nice comfy cotton, not scratchy leather. It's good. But there are aspects of colonization that are not good. But what's the yumminess from our Western teachings that we can lift up? And then from the other eye is an indigenous perspective. And we don't play the perspectives off, we put them in concert. And we take a third-eyed seeing, marry the two ideas. And so all of our work is done in a circle, meaning this collaborative, non-hierarchical, and consensus decision-making process that we move as one. Our team was drawn together with a unity of purpose and a deep commitment to consensus decision-making processes, with the aim and requirement of acceptance of all lab members that are combined with the following principles or tools of leadership: equality in conversational turn-taking. On our talking circle, everyone has a voice. And we might put that one voice in concert with all the other voices. 2 is taking the time to get to know one another. Sean Wilson in Researcher Ceremony, Evelyn Steinhauer from the University of Alberta, who's also Nehiao, shows Sean Wilson, is that for us in our Cree ontology, and I think for most Indigenous folks, is that all knowledge is relational. And what is meant by that is you can have a cure for cancer, but if you have no network to share that knowledge in, or you talk in such a way that no one understands what you're saying, in high academy and 4 people know, do you have a cure for cancer? No. In essence, you do. But with no network, you have no cure. So let's lean into the relationship. That's the most important thing. And there we can start sharing knowledge. So a priori for our ontology, or our way of being, is relationships. And then finally, listening intentionally or actively, or what we call deep listening, not only to what people are saying, but what are they not saying? And you listen in, I often listen into the void. And so we listen actively. And the above components make the possibility of psychological safety. Again, this is two-eyed seeing. We would never say psychological. No, this is just a good way of being, resulting in the following outcomes of supporting each other so that we can bring forth the best ideas. Working mindfully, respectfully, and I would even say lovingly, because it's relationship-driven, and developing innovative capabilities for us as a community, individually, but also for community. So this is kind of a schematic of how we work. And so we work with LGBT organizations, we work with Indigenous organizations, and where the two intersect is that we work with Two-Spirit organizations. And so how this works is, like, we may go to the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations and say, hey, BC, what are your needs and what do you need to work and be in better relations with your Two-Spirit membership and also your Two-Spirit relatives? So in essence, they become a lab member, self-actualizing and giving us direction. We don't comfortably sit in Vancouver and go, what do we want to study? We're going to count purple widgets because I love purple. And so we put all of our time and effort into counting purple widgets. We release the paper and the knowledge, and the community is like, this isn't helping. We need the relationship between pink and green widgets. The purple widgets is a nice little vanity project. So to mitigate that, is they're like, hey, what do you need help with? Either in resource development or within research needs. You tell us. And then we snap to life. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. We're also challenging knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization, implementation science. So within a Western world, the researcher often works in isolation, and then they have to get those knowledge and teachings out to the public, and the public be policymakers, decision funders, and practitioners. And so to fill that chasm is that you need knowledge translators to like maybe do infographics, or they're connectors, and there's a whole industry of the system because knowing and doing are two separate things. And Westerners have set up this entire system. There's this bifurcation between knowing and doing. And you need these gluers in the middle. So what we do is we do indigenous knowledge, and I'm making these terms up because I don't know what the heck to call them. So we do indigenous or relational knowledge translation. And so what we do, first of all, is we pack our canoe. And we're like, hey, who wants to join us? And we're gonna have different roles. Like here's a navigator, here's a steersman, here's a paddler. This person is like, yeah, I'm gonna take a rest. Cool, but join us. And so we pack our teams and build our canoe. And then it's like, and a part of that is the community's in the canoe with us. Then we say, hey community, where do you wanna go? Like water teachings, do you wanna start in a creek? Maybe it's a program or a project evaluation. They maybe have something that they want to evaluate. And that creek goes into a river. Do you want to do policy work? Or do you want to take the jump and go to the delta or to that larger body of water and you want to do cultural and beyond work? But it's the people in the canoe that's deciding, not me as the PI, and definitely not just lab members. So our model overlays that, and you can see that there's a seamless integration. We don't need knowledge mobilizers. They're already in our canoe. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So here's some things around research. So in Canada we have, it's called the Sex Now Survey. It's one of Canada's largest and longest national periodic survey of gay, bi, trans, and they tap on two there at the end, and queer men. And it's primarily a sexual health and mental health survey. Started in 2002. When we formed, we started working with the 2015 data set. And from our engagement with that data set, we offered some guidance to better calculate health-related and experiential knowledges for Indigenous participants. Now, although it's like a gay men's health, it's who self-identified as gay and or as men. So if you show up and you're over 16 and you say, I'm a man, and you've had sex with another man within the last 3 years, perfect. Join us in the survey. So in 2015, Q1 asked, what's your gender identity? Okay, it's problematic that trans is listed there. So we're learning, be patient, or they're learning, be patient. But Two-Spirit was offered as a variable. And then in Q2, what's your sexual identity? Again, Two-Spirit was offered as a variable. And then way in the back, on question 70, was like asking your cultural and ethnic and cultural origins. And Aboriginal was used at that time. Aboriginal is in the Constitution. It's fallen from vogue, and in Canada we just say Indigenous. But constitutionally defined, Aboriginal means First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. And so when we looked at the results, first of all, for the overall sample size of 2015, 4.5% of the sample size was Aboriginal, or about 4.5%. And I was like, wow, 156 folks either selected Two-Spirit in Q1 or Q2. And I was like, wow. I was like, pump the brakes. Of those 156, how many selected Aboriginal in Q70? 62% of those individuals who selected Two-Spirit in either Q1 or Q2 were not Aboriginal. And I was like, oh, we can do better. And so what we did was, for 2018, is we offered this guidance, that Two-Spirit, because it is the intersection of ingenuity and sexual and or gender identity or flourishing, is that within the race or cultural or ethnicity category it's a three-step process. So for Indigenous folks in Canada, if you selected Indigenous, and for the online thing we use skipping functions. And so if you didn't select Indigenous, you didn't see any of these questions. Then you got the question of whether or not you're First Nations, Métis, Inuit, prefer to self-describe or prefer not to say. Sometimes it's not safe to say. And then, and only then, do you get the question is, are you Two-Spirit, yes or no? And they accepted many other recommendations. And so again, my teaching is generosity, what is mirrored back in generosity. And I was like, how can I help you making sure that my Two-Spirit people, not mine, people like me, are participating? So I went to like, I think 8 prides. I did physical, I had rainbows shooting out of my cuticles. I had so much pride. But if you look, 4.5 became almost 9%. And in epidemiology, they call that an oversample. No, it's not an oversample, that's good research. 2 is the breakdown of this like 60-43 mirrors the general Aboriginal or Indigenous population within Canada. So it's a really good, somewhat representative sample. We didn't have to weight it. Then finally, 42% of the Indigenous respondents said and used the word Two-Spirit. So that tells me there's work. Work either in education, because they don't know. 2, maybe it's a problematic framework. But over like almost less than 1 in 2 use the term Two-Spirit. So we have to tease that out. And then finally, 0% of the respondents were not Indigenous. And so we effectively walled off Two-Spirit to only Indigenous respondents. CIHR, the Canadian Institute for Health Research, said they have a Meet the Method series. It's really not a method, it's a measure. They published it, and so many researchers have embedded it within it. So we have lots, and like in the little packet, I only did a little snippet, but we have lots of data. And because we can extract the Indigenous respondents, that we can do Two-Spirit desegregated analysis. Huge. Okay, and the real thing is that for the past, I would say, 16 months, we've been in negotiations and talks with Statistics Canada. And guess what? They may use our method. I know they're testing it, because people are like, I just got a call from Statistics Canada, Harlan. And they're like proposing this. So we may have in 2015 or 2016 administrative data going forward of Two-Spirit data. And for non-researchers, administrative data is government data. And government has to listen to government data. Where when you're doing research, that's like, oh, that's nice. But administrative data is huge. I am following up with the head of an epidemiologist here in the local area, and they're thinking of adopting our method, and then we're trying to construct an advocacy effort, because I don't want to skip US Census, it's too big of a beast, but CDC, Atlanta proper. A lot of that data is huge. And so if we can get into CDC, and so we're mapping out like a 5 or 7 year strategy to get into CDC to adopt this measure. I have a long plan. I am so patient. So here's another question. So in 2018, I was reading through the survey, question 59, in the past year, which of the following resources have you gone to? Psychiatrist, registered counselor, sex therapist, peer counselor. And I was like, pump the brakes. I know that Indigenous people, they sometimes go to elders and knowledge keepers for counsel. Had we left the question this way, and definitely with this variable, I as a Two-Spirit person am going to counsel from my elder, not going to any of these Western modalities of healing. I would have selected none of the above. And we as good researchers are like, no Two-Spirit person is going to counselors. We have to develop a beautiful new program to do outreach. Well, no, you silly researchers, noodles. You didn't ask the right question. So here is important, like both within a counseling session and resources, what you have to offer, or what you're asking, is it representative of who you're trying to engage? Because if their reality is not mirrored within the survey or in what you're putting down, you're talking to air. And so just these are the considerations. Or another good way, if you're doing qualitative or just interviewing, is ask an open-ended question. Drives me nuts with like electronic health records. I'm like, marital status, single, married, divorced, deceased, widowed. Like, how rude. If I were to ask that question, like, hey, are you in a relationship? Oh, you are. Brian, can you tell me a little bit about that relationship? I could figure it out. Check the box. And so being kind in how we ask questions and how we gather that information is what I'm trying to share with not only with these quantitative research tools. Okay, now we're going to start talking about decolonizing and challenging research. I'm actually trying to not use the word colonize or decolonize because it's kind of triggering. And it opens up the possibility for our non-Indigenous relatives that they may feel white guilt or settler guilt and settler shame. And once shame and guilt are invoked, there's a foreclosure of the relationship. You're not going to feel safe around. And so I think for decolonization, really what at the heart of that is getting in better relations. And I think we can get around that better, and let's rally on how do we get in better relations. And so you've heard that throughout the talk of how do we get in better relations with one another. But we also have to challenge some of the things of research. And so in research, and definitely within quantitative research, this is the little cartoon, but this is at the heart of most, if not 99% of research. Apple says, hey, we both grow on trees, we're both round, we're both fruit, that must make us the same. And orange goes, yeah, noodle, we're not the same, right? But literally this is how research often happens. Y'all would know that is the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that we assume two groups are the same, and so we can do a compare and contrast. A beautiful example is you go to one of our reports, our HIV surveillance report at CDC. The 2016 HIV surveillance report on page 11, it says, open quote, Indigenous women are 20 times greaterly impacted. Do you want to turn the lights down even more? Do you want a hat? University of Central Florida. A lab member gift. Indigenous women are 20 times greaterly impacted by HIV than white women. Literally, that's what it says. Okay, one, is that a fair comparison? One, I was born an Indian, I'm going to die an Indian. I'm never going to be white. So why should I be compared to white people? And then two, is that all systems, and I'm sorry that I'm using the word white, but I don't know how else to say this, but all systems have been set up by white people for white people. Educational, political, economy. Like we're having, today I got an email for Biden, and they're like trying to get me all jazzed. I'm like, I can't get jazzed over two old white guys. It's like, pick my poison. All systems have been set up by white people. And as a result of them, they're always going to have better outcomes. Education, health, you name it. Because the systems have been set up that way. We, as marginalized and or folks on the margin, are always going to be less than. And so when we say statements of 20 times greaterly impacted, what we do is we posit the problem, the responsibility of changes on the healthier group. So the null hypothesis becomes a site of white supremacy, because white people will always have the yardstick, and we're always going to be less than. And what do we do to close that gap? Do we make white women have the same rates of HIV as Native women? Nope. We just got to make those little niches more like the white woman, Munyao. And it also becomes a site of colonization. So in your reading any policy statement, you will see that comparison play out hundreds and hundreds of times, where we are always in a less than position. And it's not just reserved for us as niches. Niches is an acute way of saying native, okay? But it's reserved for any, like our queer, POC, gender non-binary, you name it. Anyone that's not white and heterosexual normative is going to be in a less than position because the systems have not been set up for us in mind. So what we do is we have large data sets, we extract the indigenous, we ignore the larger data set, and we do an intergroup comparison, quantitatively. Like, look at all of the comparisons. Like, we can go, what are the best apples for baking a pie? And we can put it together. Or, for oranges, what's the difference between the sweetness and bitterness, the size of the pith, the number of seeds? Quantitatively, there's so much that we can do within that group. But what's important about that is we become our yardstick. That's a fair comparison. Indigenous people compared to indigenous people. And I'm not saying that there's a moratorium on the null hypothesis. It's important. But if you see a gap, why does that exist? Answer that question rather than just saying the gap exists. Why? I already told you why. But, okay, this is just one because the null hypothesis was written by this dude named R.A. Fisher. I knew this, but I found this beautiful article in this publication called The Statesman, and I can send it to you if you want. But R.A. Fisher wrote the founding tenet of this book that is for epidemiology. He was a PhD student. Do you know who he studied under? Joseph Mengele. Dr. Death.
Eugenicist.
What's that?
My first thought was some eugenicist.
Right.
That's probably Genesis.
Huge eugenicist. I smelt this as white supremacy. I smelt this as colonization. And I was like, I don't want to do scholarship like that. And so I founded the lab of rejecting the null hypothesis. Because that's violence. And then only to find out that the dude studied under Joseph Mengele. Yeah, I didn't need that article. So this is a beautiful quote, and it kind of goes at the heart of the work that we're doing. It's from Audre Lorde, and I'm sure that you all are familiar with this quote, or the distillation of that quote. But I think it's important that we not just say, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Because preceding that statement, Audre said, those of us who stand outside of the circle of this society's definition of acceptable woman, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbian, who are black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences, indigenous and settler differences, and make them our strength. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. We fundamentally agree with that. However, we have that two-eyed seeing. There are some good master's tools, like quantitative analysis. But when quant is married with the null hypothesis, not cool. And so what we do is we do not affirm the master's house. We use some of the master's tools with our indigenous teachings, and we ignore the master's house. Y'all can keep on doing what you're doing. We're going to go down here and we're going to build our own village and our own community. Because the time and energy that we have to break that down is going to take me away from building this beautiful new village. You can continue. And we see the conundrum that we are under this system. Again, maybe too late for us to get in good relations with the environment, with our teacher, our great mother. Because under Western, just folly. We think that we own and dominate her. This year is going to be a drought year. Start saving your spit, because it's going to be that. That framework of education has got us into a pickle that I don't know whether or not we're going to be here. She will always be here. Whether or not we are here is the question. She works on diversity. We must work on diversity. Any genetic organism in which that there is not diversity within their genetic stock verges on extinction. And so for Western Academy and the whole thing is about uniformity and a crushing of any counter-narrative. Where how she works is however you show up, we must honor, celebrate, lift up, and put into concert and be in good relations. That's how she works, and that's what we must do. Time is an essence. We are running out of time. These are big conversations that I'm trying to solve. And I rarely share that whole thing around the environment. How we gather knowledge, the arrogance to think that we own it, and that it's ours, is a folly and an illusion, and it has gotten us into a pickle in which that we think that we are at the top of it. So for Audre Lorde, we wrote a paper, and there's this fancy schmancy new, it's not that new, it's called the Theory of Syndemics. Meryl Singer, who is this person of European descent, was studying HIV within the Latino community within Connecticut. And what Meryl Singer showed, and came up with this term of SYN, like mutual reinforcing interaction of disease, syndemic, right? And so what Singer was like, so we're looking at HIV. If someone's experiencing like domestic violence, it may increase their chances of getting HIV by 10%. Don't quote me on the 10%. I'm just making easy numbers for this noodle. Substance use, 10%. In isolation, adverse mental health, like systemic racism, 10%. And so you would think that in individuals who's experiencing violence, substance use, and adverse, that it would be 10 plus 10 plus 30. And what Singer showed empirically was that it may increase the chance of that individual getting HIV to 95%. So an intervention that only deals with one node, what have you really done to reduce the chances of that individual getting HIV? So that is why this mutual reinforcing interaction of disease and social conditions. And I was like, yeah, okay. When I go to sweat lodge, and I crawl in and out of the portal, my forehead hits the ground, and I say an expression, metakriosin. It's a Sioux expression. And it means all my relations, or everything is connected, everything is related. Does that sound kind of familiar? Yeah. Yet, Singer, and this is the hot new, like you can go, how many conferences and conference papers have you seen the theory of syndemics? Heavily cited. Singer is set up and has academic tenure and is set for their life. Everyone's publishing, everyone's talking, not us. Because quantitatively, in our paper on the drivers of sexual health knowledge, is that we took a theory of metakriosin and we showed how statistically everything is connected when we were trying to answer the question of what are the drivers of sexual health knowledge for Two-Spirit and indigenous LGBT people. And again, Singer gets all of the privilege, and what do we get? A forehead hitting the ground as we go in and out of ceremony. And the arrogance that Singer never was like, huh. Like, We have a simple expression, metakwiosin. Like, been there, done that. Like, metakwiosin is just like, it's like a hello to us. Yet he discovered it. He coined it. Similarly with intersectionality. Kim was hanging out with a bunch of Native women. And I have a problem with intersectionality. Because from an Indigenous perspective, we have a deep understanding of intersectionality. And again, we must know these histories. People have been using our knowledge or thinking and over ignoring our knowledges. Something that we have known since we've been here. This is built on sand. Because she knows everything. And we have been living with her. Y'all, we forgot, but people are connecting back to her. So what does this look like in research? Jarvis Sexual Health Knowledge. In this study, we compared the responses of those who used Two-Spirit to describe themselves and individuals who did not use Two-Spirit. Do you see how we were becoming the yardstick? And what we found that there were significant differences between the drivers of sexual health knowledges between these two populations. And then we examined the responses between those who lived in urban and rural and remote areas, and once again we found significant differences. I can send you a copy of this paper, but it's also an open access paper in the Journal of Indigenous and HIV Research. From this analysis, we can offer guidance, both policy and program, that are for those that are working or wanting to work with Indigenous and Two-Spirit people in more respectful, loving, and honoring ways. This is just some of our community work from Hoopa to Haida Gwaii. This is our team, our first team that went to Queer Humboldt. Queer Humboldt is in Northern California. And so Queer Humboldt works with the 4 local tribes of the Wiyat, Kirak, Yurok, and Hoopa. And so we have been blessed to enter into that collaboration with them and to work with their local Two-Spirit people. And it was really funny because when they asked me to go there, and I was like, why do I have to go there? Like, why? And they're like, well, we have no Two-Spirit leaders. And so from this visit in 2020, I came back almost a year later, and they had a panel of 10 Two-Spirit people that came forward. On May 30th, June 2nd weekend, we're going back. And there's a little high school Two-Spirit drag queen. And they want to host a drag show in honor of the Two-Spirit Dry Lab. And of course, we're there. And so this is the yumminess. And do you see how there is that seamless integration between knowing and doing? That's that statement. It's a beautiful statement. Like if you really want a good read that is really just centering of Indigenous ways, read that statement. This is some of our work with our other community partner in Haida Gwaii and for the Haida Nation. We program out their Two-Spirit community celebration and pride. This is some of the work that we were doing with the grade school from their local elementary school, and that's the Elder Center in the background. This is the word for Two-Spirit in Haida. And again, it's taken since 2018 to get this word. And right now we're in the process of, the elders were like, what do we do with this word? They were like, potlatch. Because any word that is said 3 times out of potlatch is either brought to life, new knowledge, or reawoken. And then, I'm almost done. Two-Spirit? Same. Sangha Stanga. This is in your information packet. The last 2 slides up there, just learning from her. So the lab takes water teachings, right? 1, we take the path of least resistance. Gone are the days of us trying to make water go uphill. Like, I am done fighting. I didn't even realize how exhausted I was from fighting, being a good activist. Now, in the lab, we only go where we're invited. We're called in. And so it's out of relationship, and I would argue out of love. That is sustainable. And so for this, when we look at this waterfall and the majesty of it, we're like, we can't create that. Maybe. But this waterfall, as well as like Niagara Falls waterfall, and the majesty of that waterfall, started by but one water droplet. That water droplet finding another water droplet, finding another. Do we have that? Who are your water droplets? Find your community. Not fight, out of love. And then finally, another water teaching for the lab is looking at the majesty of the Grand Canyon. If we were trying to create the Grand Canyon and we tried to create it in one day, it would be a violent, horrific event. This tells me from her is that we consistently show up. We pick up a little bit of sand, drop it. Have someone else pick up some little sand. And we have that majesty and that awness of like, what is going on? And that happens by water and by one grain of sand. Be kind, loving, and patient. And show up consistently even when you're not supposed to be there. Not to yell, not to scream, but to say, hey, who are you? Oh, you want to know who I am? This is who I am. That's how change is going to happen. It will happen in research, but it happens one water droplet at a time. And I know that this is a talk around being in good relations. Again, references, Two-Spirit Dry Lab. Done and done.
Thank you so much.